2006, I put my entire life into this beautiful Volkswagen Golf and drove from Seattle to Mountain View, just an hour south of here. I was definitely chasing a dream. I'd heard so much about Silicon Valley and Google, but never really imagined myself being a part of it. I remember my first day at the office. I met my new manager, Marissa Meyer, who was also the first female engineer at the company, and then made my way to my desk, tucked away in the corner of Building 43, just a couple of feet away from where the founders, Larry and Sergey, sat. And I was like, wow, they actually do share an office. I can just go right up to them. I can say hi. I can embarrass myself in so many different ways. But instead, I opened up my Getting Started guide and felt an immediate wave of panic. My starter project was to personalize all Google products. Google Search, Google News, Google Videos, all of it had to be personalized with better recommendations and more relevant search results. In 2006, 2007, this is what the Google search results page looked like. I'm sure a lot of you remember this. And we would show the same 10 blue links for a given query to everyone, regardless of what their interests actually were. And so I was now tasked with changing this paradigm. Now, for someone who had just graduated from college a few years prior, I was definitely freaking out. I knew hiring mistakes happen. I wasn't really good at coding. And so maybe I should just tell them. But as I dove into the task and worked with some of the engineers on the team, I realized that they were using something magical that made everything just work. Instead of writing line-by-line instructions in code, which is how software development traditionally works, they were teaching computers how to learn using data. And the more data you gave the computer, the smarter it became. And so I quickly realized that machine learning was a very elegant solution to so many complex computer science problems, whether it's translation, whether it's spell checking, and thankfully also personalization. It felt like I had unlocked the cheat code to software development. Now fast forward over a decade later, and I decided to move to the Google Assistant team. And I had the pleasure of working with a research team called Duplex. Now, some of you may have seen the Duplex demo in 2018. AI calling to book a hair salon appointment or a dinner reservation. And I remember the first time I saw this demo, I was in awe and felt a chill, because the AI sounded so natural, indistinguishable from a human. So of course I asked the engineers, how do we actually build this thing? And one of the engineers was saying, well, we're playing around with language models. So that was the first time I had heard about language models or generative AI. And over the course of the week, I saw more and more demos that blew my mind. And of course, I couldn't help but wonder where this is all going. So little did I know that this technology would usher in what is perhaps the most consequential exponential growth curve in the history of civilization. And we've all seen the headlines, right? Money is pouring into AI at an unprecedented pace. This year alone, probably around $150 billion is going to be spent on building these so-called AI compute clusters. Now, what are these things? Well, they include buying millions of GPUs, like this highly coveted NVIDIA chip. It includes building out data centers, like this 2-square-mile Microsoft data center in Virginia. It's basically the size of a town. Fun fact, this part of Virginia also houses the highest concentration of data centers in the world. It's called Data Center Alley. It includes building out, securing gigawatts of electric energy, whether it's gas, nuclear, or solar powered. You've probably heard that nuclear is making a bit of a comeback. And it also includes building out the water cooling infrastructure needed for liquid cooling of the chips. So that's what $150 billion gets you. And some have compared the investment in AI to the Apollo program or to the Manhattan Project. But I think that comparison falls short because AI has already surpassed peak investment levels in those programs as a percentage of US GDP. So I think a better metaphor, which you've also heard in an earlier talk, is that we are at the beginning of a new industrial revolution that will likely eclipse every previous technology shift, including, I think, the emergence of the internet. So imagine just for a moment taking all of the electricity powering every single home, business, factory in America, and using it to power these AI factories that are producing intelligence. It is quite possible that we will need even more electricity than is generated today in the US just to power these AI factories in a couple of years. So this is kind of nuts. No one can really say where this is all going. And we're definitely going to indulge in some speculation about the future. But I thought I'd ground the discussion in a couple of facts about generative AI in particular that I think are just wild. So first, fun fact, right? Despite its nascency and limitations, and I think we've all seen its limitations when we use our favorite chatbot, generative AI is already transforming industries. So let's take my industry as an example, right? I've spent the last 20 years working in tech, at Microsoft, Google, Meta, and a bunch of startups, applying AI to various problems. And I started off as a software engineer doing what millions of developers do every single day, writing code, and in my case, doing what no developer does, wearing dress shirts while writing code. As my wife likes to say, very mindful, very demure, and very off-brand for a coder. And for those of you who haven't coded, it's a lot of fun. There's a real joy to coding and building something. So when I see AI actually transform the software development industry, it's personal to me. But that's exactly what's happening right now. So earlier this year, Google and Meta published papers showing that between 30 to 50% of their new code is now generated or assisted by AI. So even at this early stage of the maturity curve, a technology that still has a more limited understanding of the physical world than a cat is already transforming one of the largest industries in the world. So that's kind of crazy. A second interesting fact is that the technology that is driving this AI revolution isn't fully understood. So we don't exactly know how large language models work or what new capabilities will emerge after we spend all of those billions of dollars scaling them. In fact, there's a term for this unpredictability that's called emergent capabilities, which refers to capabilities that appear suddenly and unpredictably as you scale these models. So for example, you may have noticed the early LLMs were pretty bad at arithmetic. And as you would scale these models, they would continue being bad at arithmetic until at some point they became good at arithmetic. So we can't accurately predict at what point that switch happens, or if it will happen at all, and what new capabilities might emerge once we scale these models. And here's a recent paper trying to actually explain this emergent capability phenomenon. And this is why I love working in AI, because we're uncovering unknown secrets of how intelligence works every single day. So we could spend hours discussing the latest advances in AI, its implications on the world at large, how AI is currently progressing at 3 times the rate of child development, how we can use AI to build the next generation of AI, which creates this insane flywheel, or how if we get to superintelligence, it could lead to a really volatile period of human history. There are plenty of YouTube videos and podcasts on those topics. Instead, let's try something a little different. Since AI has already surpassed human intellect in many areas, what is it that makes us human? And what value do we bring to the world? Now, I think these questions are both mysterious and they're also practical. And they have nothing to do with my expertise. So you're basically going to hear a bunch of philosophical ideas from a total lightweight on this topic. So please, be patient and understanding as we explore these questions, really in two parts. So first, by looking at our capabilities, and second, by looking at our essence. The question I have is there something unmistakably human about either of these two? So let's start with capabilities. Do humans have unique capabilities to contribute to the world? And if so, what are they? I think this question isn't new, but I think it has some added relevance against the backdrop of AI. And we know that machines have performed at or above human levels for years. Anyone remember this moment here? Yeah, which moment was that? There you go. This is IBM beating a grand chess master almost 3 decades ago, right? But what's happening now is that AI is beating humans across a broad spectrum of intellectual and emotional capabilities. And I think this is very, very different from the past. For the first time, you have a technology that can be used by any person to try to solve any problem without any customization, and it can give you useful answers some percentage of the time. And we've seen this, right? The latest GPT-4o model actually now has PhD-level accuracy on a bunch of physics, chemistry, and biology problems. And LLMs have even proven to be great human companions, giving advice on how to deal with breakups or work drama, or how to differentiate yourself when there are 2 Payams at the summit, effectively taking the role of an advisor or a friend. So how does machine intelligence and human intelligence actually differ? Like, if we look at it from a scientific perspective, we find that both human and artificial intelligence rely on neurons and the connections between those neurons. So human brain, on average, has 100 trillion synaptic connections, the connections between our biological neurons. Now, take a model like GPT-4. GPT-4 has about 1 to 2 trillion parameters that are effectively the connections between the artificial neurons in the neural net. So a model like GPT-4 is only 2 orders of magnitude kind of less complex than the human brain. Now, we know that a synapse isn't exactly the same as a model parameter, and the human brain is a lot more energy efficient than an LLM, but it's likely only a matter of time until AI models reach and exceed the complexity of the human brain. So here's a fascinating research paper that shows how the internal workings of an LLM become more similar to human brain activity as measured by MRIs as the model grows in size and complexity. And so if the fundamental building blocks of our intelligence can be replicated by machines, then what, if anything, might we offer to the world that is unique? I was discussing with a friend of mine whether he would be okay with a humanoid robot looking after his child. And he said, absolutely, the AI would be infinitely more patient with my kid than I am. And, part of me was a little bit depressed, and part of me was like, okay, maybe machines are going to replace and outperform us at virtually every task, even raising the next generation, which was kind of scary. So what are some of the unique capabilities we might want to refine? Is it our ability to be the source of will and purpose for our collective direction for the advancement of civilization? Is it our ability to love and experience the deeper meaning of things? Is it our ability to suffer in order to advance physically and spiritually? And are any of these capabilities truly unique to humans? Maybe, maybe not. So then let's go one level deeper and examine the essence that animates each of us in this room. Some call it consciousness, others call it self-awareness, some call it the human spirit, some call it soul. Use the word consciousness for now. Is consciousness a human attribute? I think this question is interesting because consciousness is often used as a way to describe how humans differ from other entities like machines, right? And as AI continues to advance, there's a lot of hype about whether it can one day be sentient, i.e. have self-awareness. And even though I got chills, when I saw the first duplex demo, I basically know that LLMs are just big matrices. You stuff numbers into one side, you get numbers out of the other. But can they evolve into something that has some sense of self-awareness? Or is consciousness a unique attribute of human reality? So to educate myself, since I don't know much about this topic, I read through a bunch of narratives put forth by philosophers and religious leaders, and of course my favorite science fiction authors as well. And there seem to be at least two narratives that emerge from reading those works. The first is one that we all know. It's the Cartesian approach, categorizes things into mind and matter, where mind is often used synonymously with spirit or soul. Humans have a spirit, but they also have a body, and there's some mysterious connection between the two, and the human spirit is different from that of all other beings, including animals and plants. So it's a narrative that looks at the world through the eye of distinction and really neatly categorizes things into their box. Another framework is the notion that consciousness is this all-pervasive field. So if you look at one of Isaac Asimov's novels. Has anyone read this, The Last Question? There you go. Okay, Steve, great. Not surprised. He wrote this in 1956, and it's about the emergence of the first AI. And it's an AI that is powerful enough to answer any question. As the story progresses, the AI is able to harness the power of the sun. It figures out interstellar travel, becomes more capable than any other human, and eventually the AI seeps into every corner of the universe. And we end up merging ourselves into this universal consciousness. It becomes this kind of like biological machine hybrid kind of a thing. Now, science fiction might sound crazy, but it isn't that far-fetched if you consider consciousness as an all-embracing reality that is simply expressed in varying degrees throughout the world of existence. So, do chimpanzees have consciousness? Maybe. What about snails? Possibly. What about amoebas? And so maybe there isn't a sharp dividing line where consciousness suddenly emerges, and it's more a question of degree. And so why shouldn't extremely advanced intelligences that we ourselves devise be a part of that story at some point? So we have at least two narratives, right? One that looks at the world through the eye of distinction, the other that looks at it through the eye of unity. And to me, an even more interesting question is whether both of these narratives could be true. And the closest thing I've found on this is in the Baha'i writings, where it uses the metaphor of the sea to describe consciousness in the world of existence. The sea hath ever been the sea, and all contingent things, its waves and forms. Right? So if you look at the ocean through the eye of distinction, you can count the waves. Each one looks a little bit different. But then as the waves emerge and disappear, if we look at things through the eye of unity, the only constant thing is the ocean itself, which is all pervasive. So metaphorically, could we all just be waves of the same ocean, manifestations of the same field of consciousness? And as we co-evolve, could we merge with it? Now, I certainly don't have answers to those questions, but I think as AI continues to advance, these questions on human reality come into sharper focus. So we did a bit of a philosophical detour. We explored the dimensions of human reality, our capabilities, and our essence. Now, what does all this mean for us sitting in this room, right? As business leaders, artists, philanthropists, etc. So what capabilities should we nurture to be ready for the future? So let me leave you with 3 specific ones. First, I think expertise matters. This might sound counterintuitive after everything I've said about how AI is advancing. But let me explain. I think over the short term, you could look at AI and say, oh, it's just another technology leap in the arc of human history. We've seen many of those. We went from sewing clothes by hand to having spinning machines. We went from calling travel agents to book our flights to using apps. Usually, technology pushes us to do more complex things, usually. And the same is happening with AI right now. Software developers are spending less time writing code and more time reviewing code. Data analysts are spending more time validating hypotheses instead of doing the analysis themselves. But we know that AI-generated work can contain subtle mistakes. And those subtle mistakes are often overlooked by inexperienced practitioners. So while AI is still in its infancy, I think expertise will matter more, not less. Second, I think as AI improves and approaches general intelligence, we will need to be the source of purpose and direction that guides the AI, to work on the right problems and to make the right trade-offs. And I think during this phase, very likely technical skills and expertise will start to matter less, and purpose and direction start to matter more. And finally, I think once AI surpasses us in general intelligence and reaches superintelligence, labor, or what we produce, might no longer be the defining characteristic of our self-worth, right? So being a tech person or a computer scientist or a filmmaker or a neurosurgeon won't really define our identity. Perhaps we will enter a phase of humanity where each of us will be valued much more for our character instead of our labor. And as the value of labor changes, we will likely witness a very volatile period in human history, definitely a crisis of meaning and purpose, that will hopefully be followed by a more golden age for humanity, an age of abundance, hopefully, where who we are matters more than what we produce. A world where how we treat each other and how we work together becomes the new cheat code for life. Thank you.
Think of sharing what you know.